Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Mr. Payne bringing you final exam review number 3, graphing lines. Let's talk about graphing lines and where we can begin. We'll talk about the x-intercept. The x-intercept is where the line crosses the x-axis. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. It's also known as the b, or the initial start value, or the initial cost. Let's talk about the slope. Your slope is your rise over your run, or average rate of change. The m, or the cost per something. The 4 slope trends are, you're positive, you're negative, zero, and no slope. Let's talk about each one of those. Positive means you're climbing uphill. You're going uphill. Negative means you're going downhill. 0 is your straight line going left to right. Your no slope is going north to south. Now, ways to remember that. If I put the number 0 on that line, will it roll anywhere? No, it will not. So that's how I remember that it's 0 slope. How do I remember that it's no slope? I could say N-O. I break it up. N-O, no slope. Let's talk about our no slope a little bit more. Another word for no slope that you may see is called undefined. Undefined. An example of undefined is when you have 4 over 0. If you get 4 over 0 when you solve for the slope using y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and you get 0 in that denominator, you know that that's undefined. If you type that in your calculator, you're going to get an error message anyhow. Let's continue with how to graph a line. The first way to graph a line is by using the table method. As you know, get y by itself, put it into your calculator under y equals, hit second graph, copy that table down, and plot your points. Remember that our rule is that you should have 4 or more points. Connect the line with arrows if no domain restrictions. Let's talk about that real quick. What does domain restrictions mean? Well, you remember when you see the notation -4 less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 3. That's what a domain restriction looks like. This part here is always what confuses kids. What are they talking about? Well, they're telling you that when you do a table, that your x values are going to go from -4 to 3, and that's it. So when they say domain restrictions, that's what they're talking about. Let's go ahead up to the second table, where it says y equals mx plus b. The first thing, as you always, is you're going to get y by itself. The second thing is you're going to find b and plot that on your y-axis. Your b is your starting point. Then the third thing should say find your m. Find m. And move along the graph to make the points. Find m. Remember, it's always to the right. Always move to the right. That's my hint when we're doing slope. It's either up and to the right or down and to the right. And number 4, I'm just going to take this number 4 and bring it down here. Number 4 says connect, again, connect the line with arrows. Connect line with arrows, unless that domain restriction again. So step number 3, let's just recap. Step number 3 would be find your m and always move to the right. That's my hint 2, find your m. And then 4 is connect the line with the arrows if no domain restrictions once again. Let's talk about graphing intercepts. We didn't cover graphing intercepts in class too often, okay, because these two ways are very simple as it is. However, if you do find the x and the y-intercept, you can go ahead and just draw your line through those 2 points. So cover up the y in the equation and solve for x. Plot the answer on the x-axis. Cover up the x in the equation and solve for y. Plot answer on the y-axis. Connect the line with arrows if there is no domain restriction. So we don't teach you that way too often. We don't talk about it. But if you want to, and you can figure that out, you can always do that. Just find those 2 points and graph a line by doing that. Let's talk about how to determine if it's a linear function. Well, the first thing, and you see this on the final exam sometimes, is mapping. Remember what mapping means? Mapping means you have 2 points like this, and this is what they show you. And you have your x values and you have your y values, and you're going to have arrows coming from it, like such, right? So the mapping, each x only has one arrow coming from it. So if I have 4, 5, 6, can't have 2 arrows like that. So this is a no-no. Okay, this arrow coming off of that. You can't have these 2 arrows. That's what it's saying. All right, with points, the x's do not repeat. So if I'm talking to you about your points, you're going to have a bunch of answers that look like, or a bunch of things that look like this. Now, the last one is the vertical line test. You all know how to do that. And what I want you to fill in there, if you draw a vertical line, if you draw a vertical line, it can only hit the function one time. If it hits more than once, it's not a function. Let's talk about that real quick. There's a special one. We know that that is a straight line, right? However, is it a function? If I did the vertical line test and I draw it right down there, doesn't it hit infinity amount of times? Therefore, with something that has no slope, a line that has no slope is not a function. Okay, not a function. It's a line, but not a function. Okay? All right, now let's talk about how to write an equation of a line. Let's talk about the first way. Given a graph, what you would do is identify your b, your y-intercept, where it hits the y-axis, and then count the rise over run to the next good point where that line crosses. Then put in your information into your y equals mx plus b formula. Given 2 points. The easiest way given 2 points is by using your calculator. You're going to put your points into L1 and L2. Then you're going to hit stat enter. By hitting stat enter first, you can go ahead and put them into L1 and L2. Then you're going to hit stat calc 4 and find your, and let's write it in there in case you forgot, let's write in your linear regression. So your linear regression. Stat calc 4. The last way is given the average rate of change, the slope or the per and y-intercept or initial value, go ahead and write your formula. Y equals mx plus b. Put your initial value in for your b, and then put your average rate is the m, and then place into y equals mx plus b. Or your f of x equals number times, or x plus your number. Now don't forget, if it says f of t and using t for time, make sure you change these guys. If not, you will not get full credit. So make sure. The last thing that we're going to talk about are arithmetic sequences, your arithmetic sequences. Remembering that arithmetic goes along with linear beautifully in your linear regressions. So that makes the first term of a sub 1, and d is your difference. So your d is your essentially your slope, the average rate of change. The formula is given to you: a sub n equals a sub 1 plus n minus 1 times the d power. Remember, this is your basic formula. If you go ahead to your table and you set up a table given that information, then all you have to do is go to your linear regression, stat calc 4, and you can get your arithmetic sequence.